Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope you've had a great month. We're into October now, so I'm going to do my September Marginalia video at the end of each month, sort of, what are the poems, short stories, essays, books, spiritual texts that I read that I didn't post any videos about specifically. So it was a great month of reading. The big shout, of course, was William Shakespeare. I've been in the habit the past 12, 13 years of reading at least one of Shakespeare's plays each year, just sort of my own volition. So it was fun to do that with a community this year. I read Cymbeline, I read All's Well That Ends Well, and was intrigued by both. But what was really, really fun was, I read to my daughters every night, and this month we were reading a number of the sonnets from Shakespeare. And they both really enjoyed it. They've both really been wanting more poetry in their evening readings. And at one point, my older daughter actually turned and was like, shh, like to her sister, like, she goes, shh, this is a great poem. So it was fantastic. We also read The Phoenix and the Turtle in addition to some sonnets, because The Phoenix and the Turtle is how Phoenix, Arizona got its namesake. Daryl Duppa, who was a sort of like a self-exiled British expatriate into the United States in the 19th century, over a drunken bonfire when they were arguing about what to name the town site, started reciting Shakespeare's Phoenix and the Turtle, and everybody just decided that that was a really cool name. So we read a number of sonnets, but in addition to reading Shakespeare, I read some Ben Jonson, the Epigrams, and the Forest. I preferred the Forest to the Epigrams. The Epigrams I didn't find... I thought Marshall is funnier, and Marshall isn't necessarily super high on my list. I read a pair of stories from Boccaccio's Decameron, the 9th story on both the second and third day, because those respectively dealt with the plots or subplots in Cymbeline and All's Well That Ends Well. And plus Boccaccio is just interesting. I also read, what was it? I'm going to have to cheat here. Tereus, yes. There's a Tereus reference, and then there's also a reference in Cymbeline. There's also a reference to Ceyx from Ovid's Metamorphoses, which I read in April and absolutely adored. So it was fun to sort of jump back in and just focus on those passages, not as the whole work from Ovid, but as discrete pieces that, were then referenced in another work. So it was very fun. And then sort of closing out Shakespeare, I was dipping into The History of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth. There's about a page on Cymbeline, and as I mentioned, I don't know that he deserves a sentence after reading Shakespeare's play. The character in Shakespeare doesn't deserve a sentence from Geoffrey. But then I ended up thumbing back to King Cole, Lear. Lear takes up several pages, and it's tragic in Geoffrey as well. And then, of course, Arthur and the Battle of Camlin, in part because I have a really cool board game called Pendragon, that simulates 5th century, in the collapse of Roman Britain, and so we've been playing some of that too here at the house. Couple of quick short stories. Prisoner of the Caucasus by Tolstoy, which I view as Tolstoy's Western. And then The Foghorn by Ray Bradbury, which is a deeply haunting, strange, bizarre story. The Codex Cantina did videos on both of those, and they sort of talked about the idea of the foghorn being this concept of language and communication in Babel, the Tower of Babel. And I just think it's a great story. It's a rip. Moving on with other short stories, Amy did an absolutely fantastic video on the Aleph, which is an amazing story by Jorge Borges. So I read that. After I saw his video, I went, I gotta go reread that. So I reread that, and it's a fantastic story. I also read, though, from his short stories, Shakespeare's Memory, because the last line that is quoted in that is a line from All's Well That Ends Well. I read a number of essays by Jorge Borges, which I will rank his stories, then his essays, then his poetry, and I'll probably do maybe a video on his poetry or his essays in October. Amy has me on this kick. I've got to reread The Library of Babel now as well, because that's one of my 2 or 3 favorite Borges stories. But I read a number of his essays. He has ones about sort of the Achilles and the tortoise, one of Zeno's paradoxes, and some other just really interesting ones, kind of focusing on myth, the idea of memory, and sort of how all of these pieces fit together. Highly recommend his essays. So if Shakespeare was sort of one pillar in guiding my reading in September, the other pillar was Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, which I posted a video about that yesterday, and I absolutely adored reading that book. It was just so fascinating, so interesting. To go along with that, I read another short story by Charles W. Chesnutt called A Matter of Principle, which was a really interesting story. It focused on the idea of a family wanting to make sure that of a black family wanting to make sure that their daughters who were wealthy, like the family was wealthy, that the daughters would marry men such that their grandchildren would fundamentally look less black. And so being afraid of their daughters marrying, like, you know, black men from the southern United States, this story was set in, I believe, Michigan, where their grandchildren would then look, you know, darker. And so it was interesting to see how Chesnutt really, like, it was a deep satire, but he wasn't revealing it as satire the whole time. You didn't feel like it was satire until the very end. So it was a really interesting story. Another piece that worked with that was in Song of Solomon, one of the events that happens that sort of affects the characters, particularly the character Guitar, who represents sort of this like hyperactive, you know, version of seeking to combat racism, was the murder and lynching of Emmett Till. And so I, you know, was back in my reporting civil rights, not just continuing to read through that, but going back and rereading. There's about, I think, 3 or 4 articles on that murder from the 1950s. And then with Song of Solomon, I knew that there was obviously a great deal of intertextuality with the book of Genesis and the Song of Songs. So I reread both of those. I've been kind of I've been kind of on a kick with like the Deuteronomist writings within the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. So I read all of the book of Jeremiah. And then one of the characters in Song of Solomon is, you know, they draw names from the Bible. And so Hagar was from Genesis, obviously, but one of Milkman Dead's sisters is named Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. And so I reread 1 Corinthians, which is just an astonishing book. I'm going to read 2 Corinthians in October because that's one of my favorites. In you know, another spiritual text, when I read Persian Fire, I grabbed my Viking Portable World Bible. Highly recommend this text. And read all of the selections that they have on Zoroastrianism, in part because that is, you know, a religion that there are fewer and fewer adherents to, and so it's, as I mentioned in that video, it's kind of hard to find, you know, writings. And then I read, in part because I've been playing Pendragon, particularly with my older daughter. Yes, we play complex board games as a family. And sometimes she wins. One of the most famous, you know, British like church writers was Pelagius, and so there's just a tiny, small amount of extant writings on free will from Pelagius. But I reread those, and I don't agree with all of them, but I also don't agree with the extremes of Augustine. I'm in semi-Pelagian. But I read those, and those are always, you know, thought-provoking and interesting. I've started reading 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. I finished the first 3 like parts of that, which means I'm not quite halfway through the book. But in the first one, there's a number of references to one of the characters being referred to as a Gorgon. So I grabbed Robert Graves' Greek Myths and went thumbing through all of the references on Gorgons, and those are always interesting. The idea of, you know, possibly the concept of the Gorgons originating as a mask, and then if the movement of those who wore the masks is suppressed, they become, you know, mythologized as monsters and evil. So always interesting. I believe that though there's one last one, and this was from someone who was commenting. I think it was Patrick. I might be wrong. I should have looked at this. But I believe it was Patrick who made a reference to Stephen Crane's poetry, The Black Riders, which If you've never read that poetry, I highly, highly recommend it. It is terrifying. It is strange. It is just a deep, dark. This is how it starts. Black riders came from the sea. There was clang and clang of spear and shield, and clash of hoof and heel. Wild shouts in the wave of hair, in the rush upon the wind. Thus the ride of sin. Okay, like Robert E. Howard, probably was influenced by that. And then we get, in the desert, I saw a creature, naked, bestial, who, squatting upon the ground, held his heart in his hands, and ate of it. I said, "Is it good, friend?" "It is bitter." "Bitter," he answered, "but I like it, because it is bitter, and because it is my heart." So we go very quickly from sort of an adventure to, if Robert E. Howard was influenced by that first poem, that next one, which was the third poem in the Black Riders, probably influencing someone like Cormac McCarthy in Blood Meridian. And so I reread the selections from the Portable Stephen Crane that are from the Black Riders, because that poem sequence is astonishing and dark and, just quite interesting. So that was my reading across September, sort of just all over the place. Shakespeare, Morrison, and quite a bit in between. Now, in terms of the music, in part because I was reading Song of Solomon and Milkman Dead's name is Macon, a reference to Macon, Georgia, I was kind of like in an Allman Brothers Band, mood. But when we were driving down to Chiricahua National Monument to do some hiking a couple of weeks ago, I had my Duane Allman anthology. And so he famously, not just while playing with the Allman Brothers Band, he famously was a great session musician. And so I'm going to put up a couple of songs where he's a session player. It's not the Allman Brothers Band. It's a different artist, and Duane Allman is playing guitar in there, and you can usually figure out who it is. I'm going to put up The Weight, originally by the band, but Aretha Franklin covers it, which is outstanding, and Duane Allman is playing slide guitar behind her. It's fantastic. I'm going to put up an instrumental called Games People Play by King Curtis, which I might have won an award. I know King Curtis won a Grammy or something. I don't know if it was for that song in particular. It's a banger. It's fantastic. And then I'm going to put up a cover of Hey Jude by Wilson Pickett. And if you hate Hey Jude, you should listen to this version, because it's amazing. If you love Hey Jude by the Beatles, you should also listen to this version. It might be better. So that will be my final piece in there. So have a good evening, and I'll see you later. Bye.